House in the house in the house in the freedom, freedom, house in the house in the house in the freedom, freedom, freedom.
Light from the sun, light from the sun, light from the sun, light from the sun, light from the moon, light from the moon.
Flower on the grass, grass on the grass.
Fish in the river, fish in the river, fish in the river, fish.
Ice in the freezer, ice in the freezer, ice in the freezer, ice in the freezer.
Storm in the ocean, storm in the ocean, storm in the ocean, storm in the ocean.
Thunder in the sky, in the sky, thunder in the sky, in the sky, thunder in the sky, in the sky, thunder in the sky, in the sky.
From the deep from the sun.
Silence in the desert.
House in the freedom, freedom, freedom. House in the freedom, freedom. House in the freedom, 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 freedom. House in the freedom.
Light from the sun, light from the sun, light from the moon.
Flower on the grass, grass. Flower on the grass, grass.
Fish in the river, fish in the river, fish in the river, fish in the river.
Ice in the freezer, in the
Storm in the ocean, in the ocean, in the ocean, ocean.
Thunder in the sky, thunder in the sky, thunder.
Eat from the sun, 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 eat from the
Silence in the desert. Silence in the desert. Silence in the desert. Silence in the desert. Silence in the desert.
House in the freedom, freedom. House in the freedom, freedom. House in the freedom, freedom. House in the freedom, in the freedom. House in the freedom, in the freedom. House in the freedom.
Light from the sun, light from the sun. Light from the sun, light from the sun, light from the moon, from the moon, light from the moon, from the moon, light from the moon, from the moon, light from the moon, from the moon.
Flower, flower, flower on the grass. Flower, flower, flower on the grass.
Fish in the river, fish in the river.
Hello, Moto.
ice in the freezer, ice in the freezer.
Storm in the ocean, storm in the ocean, storm in the ocean, storm in the ocean.
Thunder, thunder in the sky, thunder, thunder in the sky.
heat from the sun, sun, heat from the sun, sun. Heat from the sun, sun, heat from the sun, sun.
Silence in the desert. Silence in the desert. In the desert. In the desert. Desert. Silence in
House in the freedom. House in the freedom. House in the freedom. Freedom. House in the freedom.
Light from the sun, light from the sun, light from the sun, light from the sun.
Light from the moon, from the moon, from the moon, from the moon, moon. Light from the moon, from the moon, moon, moon. Light from the moon, moon.
Flower on the grass, flower on the grass, flower on the grass, grass, flower on the grass.
Fish in the river. Fish in the river.
Ice in the freezer. Ice in the freezer.
Storm in the ocean, storm in the ocean. Storm in the ocean, storm in the ocean.
Thunder in the sky, in the sky, thunder in the sky, in the sky, thunder in the sky, in the sky, thunder in the sky, in the sky.
Heat from the sun. Heat from the sun. From the sun. Heat from the sun. Heat from the sun. From the sun.
Silence in the desert. Silence in the desert. Silence in the
House in the freedom. House in the freedom.
Light from the sun, light from the sun, light from the sun.
Flower on the grass, flower on the grass, flower on the grass, flower on the grass.
Fish in the river. Fish in the river.
Ice in the freezer. Ice in the freezer. Ice in the freezer. Freezer.
storm in the ocean, the ocean. Storm in the ocean, the ocean.
Fire in the heart, fire in the heart, fire in the heart. What
Rock on the ground, rock on the ground, on the ground, on the ground, on the ground.
Wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape.
Air detected.
Shadows on the grave, shadows on the grave.
Fire in the heart, fire in the heart, fire. Water on there, water on there, water on there.
Rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape.
Air detected.
Shadows on the grave.
Fire and water on there.
Rock on the ground, rock on the ground, rock on the ground. Rock on the ground, rock on the ground, rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Air detected. 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 Air detected.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Shadows from the grave, shadows from the grave.
What
water under air, water under air. Fire, 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 fire in the house. Fire, 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 fire in the house. Fire, 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 fire in the house. Fire, 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 fire in the house.
Air detected, air detected, air detected, air detected, air detected, air detected, air.
Shadows from the grave, from the grave. Shadows from the grave, from the grave.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
We from the landscape. We from the landscape.
Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
Air detected, air detected, air detected.
Fire in the house! Fire in the house! Fire in the house! Fire in the house! Water under! Water under!
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
Fire in the house! Fire in the house! Fire in the house! Fire in the house!
Air detected, air detected, air detected, air detected, air detected.
Hello, Moto. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Water under! Water under! Water under! Water under!
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
Shadows from the grave, shadows from the grave. Fire in the house,
On the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Air detected, air detected, air detected, air detected, air.
Water under, water under, water under, water under. Fire in the house! Fire in the house! Water under, water under, water under, water under.
On the ground. Rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. From the landscape. Wind.
From the grave, from the grave, from the grave, from the grave.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
Air detected, air detected, air detected, air detected.
Water under, water under.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Rock.
Fire in the house! Fire in the house!
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Air detected, air.
the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Water, water, water on the head. Water, water, water on the head.
Rock on the ground, rock on the ground. Rock on the ground, rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape, from the landscape. Wind from the landscape, from the landscape.
Higher in the higher in the higher in the higher, higher in the higher in the higher in the higher. Water on the head, water on the head, water on the.
Rock, rock on the ground, ground, ground. Rock, rock on the ground, ground, ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Rock on the ground, rock, rock on the ground. Rock on the ground, rock on the ground.
Fire in the house, in the house, in the house. Water, water on the head. Fire, fire, fire in the house. Fire in the house, in the house. Fire, fire in the house. Fire in the house, in the house.
Rock on the ground, rock on the ground, rock on the ground, rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Higher in the high, in the 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 high. Water on the, water on the, water on the head.
Rock on the ground, rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Water on the head, water on the head, water, 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 water on the head.
Rock, 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 rock on the ground, rock, rock, rock on the ground. Rock, rock, rock on the ground, rock, rock on the ground, rock, rock on the.
Fire in the fire in the
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
higher, higher in the higher, higher in the higher, higher in the higher, higher in the high. Water on the, water on the, water on the head.
Rock, rock on the ground. Rock, rock on the ground. Rock, rock on the ground. Rock, rock on the ground.
Higher in the higher in the higher in the high. Water, water on the head, water on the. Fire in the house, fire in the house, fire in the house.
Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Landscape.
Water on the, water on the, water on the head, water on the head, on the head.
Air detected. Air detected. Air detected. Air detected. Detected. Air detected. Air detected.
Lightning on the road. Lightning on the, lightning on the, lightning on the road. What in the mouth? What in the mouth? on the ground, rock on the ground, rock on the ground, rock on the ground, ground, rock on the 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 ground.
Air protected. Air protected. Air protected.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Water under, water under, water under. Water under, water under, water under. Fire, fire, fire in the house. Fire, fire in the house. Fire, fire in the house.
Lightning on the road. Lightning on the road. Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
Wind from the land. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Landscape.
Air protected. Air protected. Air protected. Air protected.
Fire in the house. Water under here. Water under here. Water under here. Water under here.
Lightning on the road. Lightning on the road. On the road. Lightning on the road. Lightning on the rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
Air protected. Air protected. Air protected.
Water under here, water under here, water under here, water under here.
Air protected.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Lightning on the road. Lightning on the road. Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Rock.
Hello, Moto.
Fire, 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 fire in the house. Fire in the house. Water under here, water under here, water under here, water under here.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
Water under here, water under here, water under here, water.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. On the ground. Lightning on the road. 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 Lightning on the road.
Wind from the landscape. From the landscape. From the landscape.
Air protected. 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 Air protected.
Fire in the house. in the hole! Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole!
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Ground.
Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Fire! Water under! Water under!
Air protected, air protected, air.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
We drum the landscape, we drum the landscape, we drum the landscape, we drum the landscape.
Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Water run! Water run there!
Fighting on the road. Fighting on the road. Fighting on the road. Fighting on the road. Fighting.
Air protected, air protected.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape, from the landscape. Wind from the landscape, from the landscape. Wind.
Fire in the hole! In the hole! In the hole! Fire in water under! Water under! Water under!
Fighting on the road. Fighting on the road.
Air protected, air protected.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Fire in the hole! 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 Water run! Water run! Water run! Water run!
Lightning on the road. Lightning on the road. Lightning on the road. Lightning on the road.
Air protected, air protected.
Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Water under! Water under!
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind.
Lightning on the road. Lightning on the road. Lightning on the road. Lightning.
Air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air.
Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Water under!
On the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind.
Air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air.
Lightning on the road. Lightning on the road. Lightning.
Fire in the
Wind from the landscape, landscape, wind. Wind from the landscape, landscape, wind.
Lightning on the roof, lightning on the roof, lightning on the roof, lightning on the roof. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground.
Ice in the freezer, ice in the freezer. Ice in the freezer, ice in the freezer.
Air protected.
Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole!
House in the freedom. House in the freedom.
Water on the 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 water on the
Wind from the landscape, landscape, wind from the from the
Lightning on the roof, lightning on the roof. Rock, 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 rock.
Ice in the freezer, 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 ice in the
Air protected, 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 air protected.
Rock, rock, rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock.
fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Fire in the
House in the freedom, freedom, dump. House in the freedom, freedom, dump.
water on the 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 water on the
wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape, landscape.
Lightning on the lightning on the lightning on the road. Lightning on the lightning on the lightning on the road. Rock, rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, rock.
in the hole! Fire in the hole! Fire, fire, fire! Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole!
Air protected, air protected, protected.
Fire in the fire in the fire in the hole! Fire in the fire in the fire in the hole!
Rock, rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, rock, rock.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Water, water, run, water, run.
Air protected, protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air.
Cast on the grave. Cast on the grave. Rave.
Fire in the fire in the fire in the fire in the
Rock, rock on the ground, on the ground, rock, rock on the ground, on the ground, rock, rock on the ground, on the ground, rock, rock on the ground, on the ground.
Wind from the landscape.
Air protected.
water run the water, water run the water run the
Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave.
fire in the hole!
on the ground. Rock, rock, rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape.
Air protected, protected air.
Water on the hill, run the hill, water run.
Shadows from the grave, from the grave.
Air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air.
Rock on the ground, on the ground. Rock on the ground, on the ground. Rock on the ground, rock, 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 rock. Rock on the ground, on the ground. Rock on the ground, on the ground.
Wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape, from the landscape, from the landscape, the landscape. Wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape.
Shadows from the grave, from the grave. Shadows from the grave, from the grave.
Water on the hill, water on the hill, water on the hill, water on the hill, water on the hill. Fire in the house! Fire in the house!
Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave.
Hello, Moto.
Air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected.
Wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape.
Rock, 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 rock on the ground, round, 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 round. Rock, 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 rock on the ground, round, 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 round.
Water on the hill, water on the hill. Water on the hill, water on the hill. Water on. Fire in the house! Fire in the house! In the house! Fire in the house! Fire in the house! In the house!
Rock on the ground. Rock, rock, rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground, on the ground, on the ground.
Wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape.
Air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air.
Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave. Grave, 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 grave.
Water on the hill! Water on the hill! Water on the hill!
Rock on the ground, on the ground. Rock on the ground, on the ground.
Wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape, wind from the landscape.
Air protected, 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 air protected.
Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave.
Water on the hill! Water on the hill! Water on the hill! Water on the hill! Fire in the house! 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 Fire in the house!
Shadows from the grave. From the grave.
shadows from the grave, from the grave.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Round, 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 round.
Wind from the landscape, wind, 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 wind from the landscape, wind, 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 wind from the landscape, wind, 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 wind from the landscape, wind, wind, wind.
Air detected. Air detected. Air detected. Air detected.
Shadows from the grave. From the grave.
Water under. Water under. Water under. Fire in the house! Fire in the house! Fire in the house! In the house! Fire in the house! Fire in the house! Fire in the house! In the house!
Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground.